I would now like to introduce today's presenters. Vishal Gupta is a Vice President on the Information and Technology Services team at Everest Group. In his role, he focuses on data and analytics, recruitment process outsourcing, and managed service provider research offerings. Priya Hala is a Practice Director on the Information and Technology Services team at Everest Group, focusing on data, analytics, and artificial intelligence practice. Priya is a passionate about creating value for clients with a deep proficiency in the high-tech space and driving research on emerging trends for buyers and providers. In her current capacity, she is leading a lot of research on artificial intelligence space. Abhivyakti Senga is a senior analyst on the Information and Technology Services team at Everest Group, focusing on data, analytics, and artificial intelligence practice. In her role, Abhivyakti focuses on AI research around enterprise adoption, market opportunity assessment, and the provider landscape. And with that, I would like to turn things over to Vishal.
Well, thank you so much, and welcome everyone. I'm sure generative AI is one topic which is on everyone's mind, maybe top of the agenda. But I also believe that many of you would agree that there's a fair bit of road as an industry, as a technology disruption that Gen AI has covered, and now is the time that we start talking about more pertinent questions as to how will this technology apply to my business? What are the things that I need to take care of? What is the value I get out of it? So we believe at Everest Group very strongly that the pace of change in this industry has been immense in the Gen AI space, and we might already be in a post-hype period where the real questions have started to emerge. And one of the most important aspects, through our conversations, throughout this year, in fact, have been how to address or how to look at the safety or the risk aspects of Gen AI as a technology. While the technology is disruptive in nature, it can do a lot of things, but there are challenges associated with it. So this webinar is dedicated to talking about and trying to uncover what are the safety or risk aspects related to Gen AI, and what we believe are some of the existing solutions, best practices that we see from the enterprises, that they're taking to mitigate some of these risks. So that is how we have planned the webinar as well. There are 3 sections. We'll spend the first 10, 15 odd minutes to, to give you a brief of how do we see the Gen AI space, where do we see it today, the adoption, and some of the use cases. Then the bulk of our conversation, will focus on what are the risks, safety aspects related to Gen AI, and what are the potential solutions and best practices that you can follow. To kick things off, this is an interesting slide. I'm sure, this brings smiles to everyone's face, but the idea is to say that, look, the current macroeconomic situation in the market means that, there's already a air of caution in terms of, IT business spending from enterprises. They are becoming more and more conscious of where they are spending money vis-a-vis where they want to invest. But AI or Gen AI in specific has emerged as a silver lining because of the immense interest. And that interest is both fueled by a desire to innovate, at the same time a fear that if we do not do this, then we might be left behind, or there might be existential crisis to our business. My competitors or our competitors might race ahead. So it's both ways. So AI, Gen AI, we believe is something which is kind of very real. And again, this is, the starting for us. A lot of the questions, that were posed to me in the last 6 or 7 months, of my conversations with both the enterprise clients, the supply side ecosystem is that, look, in the last 10 years, if you look at the major technology disruptions, starting from blockchain to crypto to metaverse, a lot of those didn't pan out to be, right? They didn't become mainstream. Is Gen AI another fad? Is it another hype? And we strongly believe it is not. And we're drawing parallels with metaverse. If you closely look at it, so there are 2 things that I always say. For one, it's the adoption that's kind of key. So if you look at metaverse, if you have heard about Decentraland, which was one of the most well-funded metaverse product, at the height of its adoption, it only had, average daily user base of 8,000. Compare that to ChatGPT, in 5 days, it reached 1 million users. So the adoption speaks for itself. It's a technology which has real world use cases where, entities, people find it useful. And second, also, kind of investments that have gone into it. Metaverse, in a lot of ways, was a polarized bet. Meta spent or invested billions of dollars. Unity spent, or invested, a decent amount, but everybody else in the ecosystem was still sitting on the fence. But when it comes to Gen AI, ChatGPT opened the floodgates. Enterprises to, big tech organizations to, private equity companies to startups, billions and billions of dollars have been poured into Gen AI. And I strongly believe, that if so many entities and people have come together, they'll make something out of this technology. Yes, there are challenges and risks and other things we need to take care of as an industry as a whole, and some of it we'll talk today. But we do believe that the technology is real, and it's not just hype. Gen AI is going to become big. The interesting phrase that we always use is Gen AI it's a dragon which is a beast, or it's a giant which is a baby. So there are initial signs, of adoption by enterprises. We see POCs and experimentations, but we still believe there's a fair bit of road to cover when Gen AI becomes really mainstream and becomes kind of core for a lot of enterprises. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. The intent of showing this slide was that, look, one of the other reasons why we believe Gen AI is real is because AI as a technology is not new. The term itself was coined somewhere around 1950s, 60s, and a fair bit of innovation has happened in the last 50, 70 odd years. The reason why AI did not become mainstream because a lot of that innovation was still restricted to, the tech circle. When ChatGPT, arrived, the technology was, given to the general public. People could actually use and see what the technology could do. And that led to the explosion of AI in general and Gen AI in specific. And that's adding to, our conviction that it is as real as it gets. One of the other things, and I think some of the questions that we also received was, how do you see Gen AI, as compared to traditional AI? Now, traditional AI, there are many terms floating around. You can call it decision AI, you can call it narrow AI, you can call it predictive AI. But, we believe that Gen AI is a significant leap or step change from the traditional AI technology. And there are multiple reasons for it. For one, the traditional AI technology, if you look at the output, it was largely prediction based, right? Which means it used to predict what's going to happen or what will happen based on probabilistic, analysis. Gen AI, and this is the key difference, is something which can generate fundamentally new content. It can be text, it can be video, it can be speech, it can be code, it can be anything. So the biggest difference, and the reason why I'm saying a step change, is because it's fundamentally generating new content as opposed to traditional AI, which was more predicting things. And also, the reason why Gen AI is able to generate new content is because of how it's being created. The training for Gen AI is done on huge, large data sets, right? Chat GPT that you see, or you might have used, all of you, was trained on almost all the data that was there on the internet, till end of 2021. So the huge database, traditional AI models or AI solutions were trained on relatively much smaller data sets. It takes a lot of time and a lot of money and investments to train Gen AI models just because of the sheer amount of data and the capabilities needed. As opposed to that, traditional AI is cheaper to train and quick to train as well. And the kind of supporting infrastructure needed. Gen AI needs specialized hardware like GPUs, graphics processing units, and TPUs, tensor processing units, whereas traditional AIs can be trained on relatively standard computing infrastructure. So there are a lot of differences between Gen AI and traditional AI. The key to take away is Gen AI can fundamentally generate new content. The capability was never there before, Gen AI. The traditional AI was more of a predictive tool. So with that, let me kind of, get into a poll. A quick poll to check, from our audience, how do you see, Gen AI? How significant do you think Gen AI is a priority for your organization? And the reason is we want to understand, we want to, distill the hype from reality. The options, you can see, it's core to you, primary area of focus or investment for the next 12 months, or second, it's a critical priority and you have allocated dedicated resources. Third, you're interested, but you're still sitting on the fence and because you haven't yet identified the relevant use cases. Or the last one is you already have your hands full. There are a lot of priorities for you, and Gen AI is not currently a priority. So we'll see how the results come out. But based on our conversations, we believe that a large part of larger organizations, almost all of the Fortune 500 companies, they are experimenting, playing with this technology in one fashion or the another. The question of how scalable it is right now in their organization, it's a debatable question. Not many organizations have been able to scale it yet because there are still unknowns, a lot of unknowns about the technology. But most of the Fortune 500 companies, they are experimenting with the technology one way or the another. So let's look at the poll results as well. Right now I can see that it's what we it's in line with what we are seeing in the market. A bulk of or more than 50% of the respondents are saying it's a critical priority, and dedicated resources have been allocated to explore the potential. That the results speak for itself. A good number, almost 17%, is saying it's a core focus, number one priority. I think less than 2% are saying it's not a priority for us. So I think the results pretty much explain that Gen AI is kind of one of the most important priorities for organizations going forward. Let me also take a couple of minutes to, also talk about how to think about the use cases, because, a good number of responses was around, we're still exploring, where to apply Gen AI. We're still trying to identify the use cases. So here's a neat framework we have created. You can create multiple versions of it depending upon your industry, depending on your BU. We have taken a more horizontal view, looking at all the business functions, horizontal business functions. Essentially, what we are saying is there are two key aspects, nuances to look at it. One, and on the y-axis, we are saying try to look at the output. What kind of impact Gen AI will have if you applied it to a particular solution? And the way to look at the impact is what kind of business impact it is creating in terms of increased efficiency or better customer experience. And secondly, how scalable the solution is, because eventually, if you apply the technology, you will have to scale it, in the years to come. The second key thing to look at is the relevance, which is the input parameter, whether I should apply, Gen AI in a particular area or not. And that is dependent upon the feasibility, which is what's the kind of, the degree of regulation, how, risky it would be to apply Gen AI. And second is the criticality, which is use case suitability. What is the cost penalty of task failure if you apply Gen AI? So net, I'll not go into the details, but if you look at all the horizontal functions, top three, clearly where we see a lot of adoption right now is customer service operations, sales and marketing, and IT operations. And there are multiple reasons. One, there is already a big knowledge base with organizations existing for these areas in the digital format, which they can use and mine and train their Gen AI models. Secondly, there is also a real need. Think of sales or marketing people utilizing Gen AI to create marketing memos, generate personalized emails, or in the IT operations, in the software development, using Gen AI to create code, test code. So there are real use cases, and these are the three areas where we see a lot of adoption amongst enterprises. As I said, you can create your own versions depending upon your industry. For example, we're hearing that drug discovery and research is a big area in the life sciences industry where Gen AI is seeing adoption. You can also look at virtual assist tools, in the online shopping luxury industry, where the tool helps you based on, the customer profile. They can help with the clothing and other things, how it looks to you. So there are multiple other cases which are emerging in different industries. What we are sharing is a philosophy that you can use to prioritize use cases, which you can start first versus later.
Hey,
And
Vishal, before we move ahead, we have an interesting question here. So, one of the audience is like our audience is asking, how do you harness generative AI while ensuring that the intelligence does not skew your information output? So, when you can't afford quote unquote AI fiction or say surprises, are you better off sticking to rule-based AI applications, or is it still relevant to apply generative AI based models? So, what's your take on that?
yeah, so it's an interesting question, and what I'll say is Gen AI is not a magic bullet. there are limitations to the technology. I'm sure many of you would have seen articles saying that Gen AI has a math problem or Gen AI is not a calculator. Even seemingly simple mathematical problems, the Gen AI chatbots or tools are giving wrong answers. So I think the way to look at it is Gen AI is, by the very nature of the technology, is probabilistic in nature, which means you cannot guarantee what output it will generate. Even to same question, it will have a different answer every time, right? You would have experimented with ChatGPT. So in your business, in your areas where you are looking at more deterministic answers, which is, let's say, in the banking industry, which is a highly regulated industry, you would look for more deterministic output. And that is where it makes sense to not use Gen AI. You may want to use traditional ML models or rule-based systems because it's more deterministic in nature. I'm sorry, the slides are moving. I don't know what's happening, but net, what I'm trying to say is, if you're looking for deterministic output, where you need to know what output or what result this solution needs to create, probably Gen AI is not for you. But if you are looking for something, in areas where, Gen AI can fundamentally create new content like marketing memos, as I said, or there's a need for creativity. I think those are the areas where Gen AI might be most suited. So net, it will be a combination of two. As I said, Gen AI is not a magic bullet. You need to evaluate which areas are best suited, and that's where this framework comes in. Most likely, the way forward would be a combination of traditional ML versus Gen AI, depending upon the need and requirement of certain areas.
Perfect.
Okay. In the interest of time, let's move forward, and the rest of the webinar will focus on specifically on the risks, safety aspects, and the potential best practices. But before we go into that, just a quick highlight. There's a lot to talk about, the current adoption of Gen AI, use cases, industry specific, what we are hearing, and how we see the supply side ecosystem. So there's a comprehensive market report that we're creating for generative AI. It will be out in the next 7 to 10 days, and it will answer a lot of these questions that you might have, for your own businesses. So we'll request you to subscribe to it. There's an option, there's a link in the chat window to sign up for this report, and as and when this gets published, which is likely in 7 to 10 days, we will be sharing this comprehensive market report with you. So with that, let's move on to the meat of the conversation, which is, what do we see as the risks and safety aspects with Gen AI? And let me invite my colleague Priya to take us through that.
Thank you, Vishal, and thanks everyone for taking out time and joining this webinar. So I'll talk about the risks that are becoming pertinent to the Gen AI world. And just to make things more tangible, let me actually start with some real world examples of certain risks that are emerging because of generative AI. Right? As Vishal said, it is a great technology, it has huge potential, but it is also true that the technology is still at its nascency. There are still a lot of unknowns in the market that needs to be solved for. And today we are going to talk about the risks of generative AI, which is like a typical unknown for this world. So if we are to go back almost a year back in time when ChatGPT was launched, for the first time, I think employees and individuals outside the core tech domain, they started experimenting with AI systems. And with that happening, a lot of companies' private data that was until now secured behind the safety walls of the company, that started leaking out to the generative AI systems, or they say the LLM models. And that eventually led companies to ban ChatGPT for internal usage. So that was an initial reaction. And even till date, a lot of companies have still not opened up their systems to such tools. I think a recent addition to the list was US Space Force. I think they recently announced that they have temporarily banned the usage of tools like ChatGPT, citing data security concerns. So while this is true on one hand, we are also seeing that this number is falling day by day, and majorly because companies have become more open to experiment with generative AI systems. Also, up until now, human creativity and ability to think was one of the things that made them stand out from these intelligent systems. And with generative AI, one of the biggest concerns that we are hearing and that's looming over everyone's mind is that how do we think about the creative jobs if AI systems take over? right? And these AI systems have been trained over existing data and often without actually taking the consent of actual IP owners. So these concerns are becoming more pertinent, and we saw various media houses, creative agencies, they are starting to voice out their concerns, and which is ultimately resulting into piling a lot of lawsuits against these model providers. And what you can all see on your screen is just some real life examples of how these risks are becoming real and more tangible. And enterprises have actually started to take them more seriously. They are not just sitting on the fence, and they are taking a more proactive approach this time. So I'll not drain the slide by going over deeper examples, like whatever is highlighted on the slide, but let me just pick one of them and talk about the Hollywood screenwriters. So they actually went on a 146-day long strike, almost 5 months long strike, to seek guardrails against the use of AI systems. And interestingly, just a couple of weeks back, I think around September end, they actually won this case. So, and there are many more such examples. But what we believe is that before one thinks about implementing generative AI solution, it is important to understand what are the risks attached to it. And because one of the reason is that this technology, the implications of even a very small amount of carelessness can be huge. And we all saw what happened to Google's market cap during when the time Bard was launched. It almost fell by 100 billion USD after it showed inaccurate results during its launch period. So it's extremely important to understand these risks. And so that brings me to the next slide, which is where we are talking our perspective on how to look at the generative AI risks, right? So if we closely look at the risks posed by generative AI systems, these can largely be bucketed into four categories, right? So data security privacy, which is the risk of enterprises exposing sensitive or confidential data to the third party, right? Or to even to their competitors. Explainability or hallucinations, which questions the reasoning ability of these models and also poses like whether or not they are accurate. Then another category is responsibility and ownership, which essentially talks about who owns the liability if these systems go wrong. And finally, bias and ethicality. I think this is something which doesn't need any introduction. But these are the broad four categories which we are hearing, like we can allocate the generative AI risks to. And now we will go deeper into all of these categories. So let me just start with the very first one, which is around data security and privacy. So this talks about the risk of enterprises that enterprises have by exposing their sensitive or confidential data to third party. And for industries such as, say, healthcare, financial services, which deal with a lot of customer sensitive data, for such industries, even leaking those information out to the outside world. So this risk surrounds these problems. And if we closely look at the nature of this risk, it actually creeps in at a very early stage in a generative AI lifecycle, right from the training data and data preparation stage, wherein the models can learn and also retain information that might be confidential for enterprises. And this is not just restricted to the training data, but it can also extend to data which is used for fine tuning the models. So the first thing to look at it is to get your training data sorted. And we will be talking about more on how to look at your data strategy later, but that's one part of it. Second, it is also coming up, the risk of data privacy can also come up while your employees or you as a person are using the generative AI tools. So say, for example, you are they're putting in a prompt which can actually include a lot of private information that unknowingly you are putting to the AI system. So then the question is, how do you control what prompts are being fed to these systems? How do you keep a more closer check on its usage? So these kind of questions are becoming more important to be solved for. And one can imagine the implications. So we live in a world where data is a true differentiator for any enterprises. And with generative AI, I think that has become more pertinent. It is a core asset for any enterprise today. And it becomes all the more important to keep it safe, right? So net, this is the biggest risk that some of our enterprise clients fear of. And clearly, what we are seeing is that even the most advanced generative AI systems today are not capable of handling this risk. We've all heard stories of instances where ChatGPT actually leaked private enterprise data, be it, say, Samsung examples, wherein the code actually leaked out into the AI systems. And there are many more examples, but net, it is important for enterprises to have their own set of guardrails while dealing with such systems and while dealing with their data. So, right, that's the data security and privacy risk. So, let me now move on to the next category, which is around hallucinations and explainability. So explainability, I think it's basically answering where the data is coming from or questioning the reasoning capabilities of these large language models. And second category is hallucinations, which is when the AI models make up data when the model does not know the right answer or generate outputs that may appear to be plausibly right, but they are factually wrong or they are out of context. It could be anything. And one of the most important issues with large language model is that they are not reliable right now. At least right now, they are not reliable, right? Until one can truly trust the output generated by these systems, the adoption needle just cannot move forward. So that's what we believe. And the issue of explainability, if we talk about the explainability bit of it, it's not new. So it was there. Like, I think Vishal was talking about the traditional AI systems, whatever you may want to call it, but this issue was very much pertinent to the traditional machine learning model as well. But what has happened with generative AI is that it has taken the risk altogether to a new level. And now it has become a pressing need to solve for this, right? And on the other hand, if you look at the large language models, they are trained in such a manner that it mandates them to generate an output. And in the absence of relevant training data, these models just make up stuff. So again, if we can feed these AI systems with more relevant data, it can actually solve a lot of issues. But again, the question here is how much and what type of data is good enough to prevent these systems from hallucinating. So in order to scale the adoption beyond experimentation, we believe that it is important for us to be able to trust the output that is being generated by these systems and then make them more reliable for enterprise adoption. So that's the hallucination and explainability bucket.
So Priya, on this one, we received an interesting question, and see, one of the things is, large language models, by the very nature of the technology, they are, trained on a large data set meant to be broad-based solutions that can be applied to a wide variety of use cases and areas. Now, the question is that, look, the hallucination explainability part is real because the question is nobody really knows or who should attest that the output by the solution is right or wrong, right? Someone has to say that, look, this is right or wrong. And in that case, if you're using a large language model versus if we use, let's say, a small language model or a tiny language model. So I think everyone knows that ChatGPT was, underlying LLM was GPT 3.5. It was trained, it was like 175 billion parameter, model. Why don't we use tiny or small language models, lesser number of parameters, which are for specific areas or industries? Do you think something like that may help with the hallucination or explainability problem?
It is a very interesting question. And if you look at the generative AI story so far, larger the better has been the narrative. However, as I just spoke about reliability issues of these models, clearly it is important that these models are fed with the right context and are also trained on the right quality of data. So no matter how much amount of data you have been the model has been trained on, unless and until it is fed with the right context and right quality of data, the issue will still persist. And this is where I believe smaller language models are becoming more handy. So they may not be able to answer and do thousands of tasks, but they are efficient in performing tasks which are pertaining, which are very specific to their domains. And in my conversations with a lot of technology providers, even say a model like large language model providers, this is where the future is. So yes, we are definitely seeing many investments in smaller language models, which are not too small. They are smaller and more contextualized models, which are built on top of these foundation models. And we believe this will be the way forward. And I mean, honestly, it is a more realistic way for enterprise adoption, both in terms of better output and also in terms of cost. I know that we are not touching the cost bit of it here in this webinar, but it's more realistic way, both in terms of these cost and output. That's what I believe. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, the takeaway I'm taking is larger is not necessarily better.
Definitely not. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So I'll move on to the next bucket of the generative AI risk, that is the ownership and responsibility, basically answering who is responsible for the quality and legality of the output generated by these intelligent systems. And I might have a lot of questions here. So for example, if things go wrong, is it the model owner to be blamed or the user? Who will own the generated generative AI based data? Is it the enterprise who has licensed the GenAI platform to develop its content, or is it the application provider, or is it the underlying model providers? So whose IP it is? So these questions are very much present, and they are literally unanswered right now. Most of the conversations are around quality of training data, whether or not it just violates anyone's IP. And all of us have seen piling lawsuits and copyright cases on the model providers. And to be honest, this is just the start. And we believe that the legal landscape for generative AI is going to become more complex and more tricky once the legal issues around the output side of the house. So basically, when the output generated by the generative AI systems become more pertinent, so who will own the output will become, and that is where the legal landscape will become more tricky. Overall, we believe it is important for enterprises to be careful while they select the tool they want to go with, and consequently, we believe this will also become a differentiating factor for generative AI supply side of the house. So that's around ownership and responsibility.
So again on this, Priya, before we move on to the next one, we received a very, very interesting question. It says that are we seeing some third-party players providing insurance to cover for AI errors? And we know that AI is making mistakes in a lot of cases. It will create errors. So are you seeing anyone providing some kind of an insurance that look, if it makes a mistake, we'll cover up for it, stuff like that? Any thoughts?
So to answer the question, right now, we do not see any major, from an insurance perspective, I have actually not seen any major insurance company covering the AI risk, let alone the generative AI risk. So that's on the insurance bit of it. But having said that, I think on the face of it, we are seeing that a lot of these Gen AI providers from a technology provider landscape, they are stepping up to extend legal protection to the users. For example, I think Adobe announced that they will legally compensate the customers that are sued on copyright infringements for the images created by their flagship Gen AI IP product called Firefly. And I think many others, including big techs, Microsoft, AWS, Google, IBM, they have also announced similar protection. However, there is a caveat, and I think there is a nuance to it. If you look at the terms and conditions more closely, for example, AWS, they recently said that they will indemnify customers against the copyright issues for if they emerge. But if you look at the clause more closely, Amazon's indemnification only applies to the company's in-house family model. So the Titan family of the generative AI models, and Amazon's code generating at the code whisperer. So it just applies to its own IP and not to the third party model providers. So it has to be carefully looked at without going deeper and just relying on what they are saying. So that's what my take is. All right, so let me move on to the last category of the risk, that is bias and ethicality. So I don't, again, like I said, this does not need much of an explanation. I mean, there are ample number of instances and concerns regarding biases of AI system. And essentially, let me put it in two broad concerns, right? First is that they raise concerns around inclusivity of these systems and their long-term implications on the society. So think of it this way: if these generative AI systems are the basis of providing education, like a lot of edtech companies are using these tools to provide education to students. So if these tools are having inherent biases, then I think the future is not so bright. So that's one. Second is the sustainability impact of these AI systems. I mean, all of us have heard how resource intensive these AI models are, specifically talking about the environment aspect of sustainability. Today, we do not see much talks going around this particular aspect, but we do believe that as and when these AI systems scale, these questions will become more pertinent. So that's our take on the bias and ethicality bucket. And with that, let me just hand it over to Abhi, and we end the section basically on these were the types of risks. And now I would like to hand it over to Abhi to talk about the brighter side of the house. So, the technology is moving so fast that we have started seeing some of the solutions come up to solve these risks. So Abhi will talk about those solutions. And I think before we move on, we have a poll. So yeah, so like I said, the technology is moving so fast. We've actually started seeing a lot of solutions come up. So we wanted to check and gauge you, like what steps you as your organization have taken to mitigate some of these risks, just to gauge your maturity on the generative AI risk. So is it something that you have a very strong strategy and you are developing and adhering to strict guidelines, or you are engaging in active conversations with experts, you've implemented third party auditing and validating tools, or it's just on the lower end of the house where you're just investigating about the tools and technology and it has not taken to the actual implementation, or is it something that it is not a priority? So let me also share the results as and when we have it. What we believe is that companies we have seen that the enterprises are more proactive this time, and we believe most of the enterprises have actually taken steps to develop and adhere to stricter guidelines, and they have actually taken more mature steps to cater to some of these risks. And yeah, so we have the poll results, and similar to what we are also hearing from our enterprise clients, it's very much in line with what we are seeing, that most of the responses are in the first two categories, wherein we are seeing more active and proactive approach to solve for these generative AI risks. So interesting. Thank you for the response, and with that, I'll hand it over to Abhivyakti.
Thanks, Priya. Now that everyone has looked at the abyss with Priya, let me point out some of the lights at the end of the tunnel. So we realize that enterprises understand the value behind generative AI, but we believe that enterprises need to take a more holistic view when it comes to their generative AI investments. And what we mean by that is looking beyond the immediate benefits and considering the ethical, legal, and operational implications that come with generative AI. So we at Everest Group, we have identified some of the key tenets that can help enterprises minimize these risks and also safeguard their assets, their reputation, and ensure business continuity. So let me move on to the first tenet, which talks about governance and making it a strategic priority. So it is very important to balance innovation with responsible governance. And there are key steps that enterprises can take to ensure so. And one of the most important is to have clear AI policies and practices in place across the organization for data usage, for AI governance, algorithmic decision making, and so on. So Priya pointed out some of the risks that were faced because of lack of some of these policies. So, for example, Samsung faced data leakage just because there were not proper policies within to ensure how employees can deal with generative AI and use generative AI properly. So, which brings me to the next point, which is ensuring AI literacy. Now, it is very important.
I think we have an interesting question here. So you talked about internal state of regulations and governance, but we have an interesting question around what is the current state of data privacy regulators outside of the company's four walls, and like how are they responding to generative AI? Any take on that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think governments are definitely realizing the need for stringent AI policies, and this has been further strengthened by generative AI. So they've started looking beyond the positives and the benefits and are wary of the risks associated with this technology. Of course, Europe is leading this with the GDPR and the upcoming EU Act. You talked about Italy banning ChatGPT for a month, and more recently, we heard Poland is also probing into OpenAI due to privacy concerns. US and Canada are also contextualizing their existing laws around data protection and copyright to include AI, while they are also discussing some more focused AI focused laws. But I believe this is a very dynamic space. So enterprises definitely need to be more agile and attuned to these existing as well as upcoming regulations, especially in their operating geographies. So setting up internal teams that closely follow these developments or ensure compliance will become increasingly crucial. I also believe that enterprises that by collaborating with each other to identify best practices for a particular industry or a particular domain will also help make this transition much easier.
Understood. Thanks.
Perfect. So let me go back to my slide, which is I was talking about AI literacy. So I think one of the most common questions in all AI conversations is how will this impact my job? And with the right change management practices, enterprises can help dissipate some of the fears that employees may have around generative AI and train their talent to understand the value around generative AI and also ensure the best way to partner with these technologies. So we see, for example, Apple is already trying to hire some of these talent that are well versed with governance and can implement these privacy preserving capabilities personalized to users. The third is security focused partnerships. So there's an emerging ecosystem of technology providers and service providers that we are seeing in the market. And when enterprises reach out to them to implement generative AI in their organization, it is very important to choose the right partner and have upfront conversations with them around safety guidelines. So ask pinpointed questions on who will store my data, who is responsible for legal liability, who will be responsible when there are copyright claims. So having these conversations will definitely ensure that you're in the right track to implement governance across the organization. And lastly, something that organizations have already been doing is implementing routine security assessments. So either through internal audit processes or through adversarial testing by external auditors, so, which might help identify potential areas of concerns way before they actually become concerns.
So all of this is very good, Abhi. I mean, just one thought. I think on the last slide, you talked about policies, literacy. I think everyone understands that. I think what I would want to kind of highlight is that at least in my conversations, this part around audit is becoming really important and interesting. Just like there are financial audits, as AI as a technology permeates through your enterprise technology and systems and environment, I think it would make sense to have regular audits of where you stand. Are you complying to the policies? Are the right security mechanism in place? So I think this audit is going to become interesting and maybe even more mainstream going forward. And I think you already talked about this, Abhi, but I just wanted to kind of highlight, because I personally in my conversations I'm hearing about this a lot.
Yeah, absolutely agree. We are also hearing things like red teaming, where enterprises are establishing specific councils and specific teams that are testing for vulnerabilities for their tools and their systems. So definitely agree that it's going to be a key priority.
Great. Okay.
So when we talk about generative AI, data is also a very important asset. So we believe that having the right data and proprietary data is something that will create differentiation for enterprises. But while this data is fed into the generative AI to create wonderful outputs, it is important to have strong control over this. So we are seeing multiple examples in the market. So for example, for data pipeline monitoring, some of the media houses have actually blocked uh, OpenAI and Bard from scraping their web pages. And we're also hearing, so Priya talked about copyright being a major concern when it comes to generative AI generated content. And there are cases where enterprises are trying their best to protect some of the content creators. So Getty Images has pledged to reimburse photographers whose photographs were used to build their GenAI software. Universal Music Group has also issued copyright strikes on AI-generated YouTube videos. Then when it comes to data, it is also very important to have unbiased and quality data to ensure that there is content moderation and no prompts or output is harmful to any group of the society. The other thing, so generative AI definitely is a new thing and everybody is excited about it and wants to experiment with it, in which case private hosting of LLMs comes into play. So Walmart is an amazing example where they announced a GenAI playground that allows employees to safely experiment with the different technologies without fears of data leakage to the other third-party models. The third tenet talks about seeking external help. And we covered this a bit when we talked about the first tenet on how the partnership ecosystem is evolving. But just wanted to highlight that there is an emerging ecosystem of AI security focused startups that is coming up. And most of them are focused on security right now and are trying to cater to the data privacy risks in different ways. So we have privacy preserving AI implementation, then there is federated learning, then we're also seeing tools coming up that can help enterprises opt out of the generative AI training tandem. So while we're also seeing players like Brain Trust, for example, that can also help enterprises talk to different AI experts across the globe and gain that expertise around AI governance and AI security. So there's a lot of communication happening there, a lot of players coming up. But on the other hand, the big wigs are also not behind. So they're not just not looking at innovation. They've also realized the importance of having governance in place and having secure tools and technology in place. And some of the examples like OpenAI that are implementing a new technique after DALL-E faced a lot of backlash due to the lack of diversity in the images that they are producing, or Google Cloud and Salesforce coming up with safety and security capabilities like Einstein GPT Trust Layer, or maybe tools for explainability and IAM or retrieval augmented generation and other capabilities just to ensure governance for their platforms.
So just to, just to add to that, and on the previous slide again, you see the intent of, showing this slide is not to say that, look, you need to partner with this particular provider or that. It's just to, kind of highlight, again, it's a representative list, but what we're trying to say is there's a whole ecosystem springing up, which is specifically focused on AI security aspects. So some of these companies that we've highlighted in the bar graph, Calypso, Hidden Layer Product, Nomic AI, their primary play and their primary solution is specifically focused on how to mitigate or solve for some of the risks associated with Gen AI or AI in general. It can be explainability, it can be security, cybersecurity, other things. So it is, and I think one of the poll results, if I go back, we also saw that, a good number of results, I think more than 30% said they are also actively seeking external help. So I think this is resonating, and we believe there is merit to explore external partnerships, external collaboration, external help, because there are a lot of relevant solutions coming up in the market that can solve for some of these problems.
Yeah, absolutely. So these are just examples of a very long list of providers and what they are offering when it comes to governance and AI risk tools.
Great. Okay.
Right. So the fourth tenet talks about an emerging theme, which is synthetic data. And we are seeing rising interest in this field with many enterprises and providers exploring synthetic data as an alternative to real data. Beyond the obvious benefit of synthetic data as an alternative to ensure real data is secure and private, we can also use synthetic data to improve the bias and remove bias from the real data. So the real data might not be comprehensive or exhaustive enough, but with synthetic data, you can have the unbiased data that can also help reduce hallucinations or any bias or harm to any of the groups. And we're seeing different ways with which enterprises are actually interacting with synthetic data. So we are seeing many of the enterprises either building their own synthetic data tools or reaching out to some of the technology providers to partner with them and build their own synthetic data set that is relevant for their specific organization. So we have eBay, we have FCA, which are doing something in that area. Then the other option is buy, where players like Snowflake and other marketplaces are easily making synthetic data sets available to the enterprise, to the larger audience that was created by other generative AI companies. While this might not be as nuanced, it's a good first step for enterprises that are stepping into synthetic data and using that for their generative AI implementations. The third area is partnering. And by partnering, we mean there are a lot of service providers in the market, and these service providers are in turn building their own tools or partnering with the technology providers for synthetic data. And since service providers will also understand an enterprise context, and in this way can help enterprises create a more niche, nuanced, and contextualized data set for their use case. Lastly, I wanted to talk about LLM ops. So while it is fairly simpler to build a POC and build a model, there are several development and operational challenges when we try to scale these POCs into production, which is where MLOps comes in. MLOps is machine learning operationalization, and that helps decouple the model development side of things from the model deployment side of things. And with the complexity that comes with generative AI, we are seeing a new branch of MLOps, which is LLM ops, that is large language model operationalization. And while we understand that LLM ops is traditionally a way to ease deployment, we are seeing multiple examples where service providers, enterprises, and technology providers see value in this tool because of the end-to-end model transparency and visibility that it offers. Just because you have full visibility of the entire machine learning pipeline, you can identify areas of concern, see where the data is drifting, causing bias, and ensure model explainability, while offering security features like access control or data privacy and data quality. So with this, we conclude the webinar.
Let us pick up some questions. To summarize, there are a lot of things happening in the industry. We are seeing new solutions emerging. We talked about 5 things with you today: the governance, data control, engaging external partners, synthetic data, LLM ops. Again, some of this will need to be contextualized to your particular situation and business. For example, one of the questions someone raised in the window, that synthetic data itself can lead to bias in the model. It can, yes, and hence you need to do a controlled usage of synthetic data. There are numerous articles in the open forum that synthetic data can also lead to models becoming dumber if you keep on training your models on just synthetic data, because it will not be representative of the real world. But there are cases in situations where synthetic data can actually become very, very helpful, especially in areas where there is dearth of enough data, areas where very sensitive data is involved. You don't want to use it to train the models. You can use synthetic data. So again, see, what we're trying to say is these are some of the emerging solutions, best practices that we're seeing, a lot of enterprises doing in the broader industry. This needs to be contextualized to your particular situation and business area. And of course, the pace, the change in the industry is very fast. We will also see these areas that we have talked about evolve in the coming months, as well as some new ones coming up, and we'll keep on talking about, and we'll also kind of talk about some of those. We have 4 minutes. I think there are a couple of questions that we also kind of received. One was very interesting around the cost aspects. Someone wrote that you are interested in Gen AI, but you find the technology to be extremely expensive beyond conversational AI chatbots. And I'll share my 2 cents, but Priya, you can chime in as well, because I think Priya was doing some analysis on the cost aspects. But you're absolutely right, because the technology is new, and that also means that the cost is very high. Of course, as with other technologies, we expect that over a period of time, some of the costs will come down, economies of scale will play in. But right now, the way we see it is, first of all, if you just sit on the fence and don't try the technology, there's a real risk for you to be left behind. So be bold to try. But the way to think about it is the cost implications, they will become lesser and lesser important if you're looking at areas where you're trying to apply Gen AI in the long term. If you look at areas, if you're just applying Gen AI in specific pockets, smaller areas, experimentation, or just for specific use cases, you might not get the enough ROI on the money that you are spending. However, if you believe there's an area, so for example, I talked about marketing, I talked about customer operations, right? These are areas where eventually, the technology Gen AI will embed itself in the core operations, and that means it's going to be there in the long run. So the cost aspects in these cases eventually will start yielding, in the longer term. And I think there was a question there as well that, look, something like customer operations, there were already chatbots and conversational AI tools and systems that were already in place before Gen AI came into the picture. So how do you see that investment? Will they become redundant? See, at the end of the day, I mean, chatbots are nothing new, right? I mean, the first chatbot, Eliza, was introduced in 1960s, and over the years, we've seen great improvement, innovation. But we strongly believe that Gen AI is a significant step up from the pre-Gen AI era conversational AI chatbots in terms of their contextual learning, the kind of responses that they have, in terms of their conversational flow, the kind of questions you can ask, the kind of responses they come are very human-like. And thirdly, purely the ease of use, and the kind of contextual answers that the solution can give. So the quality of answers, the responses, and the experience are much better than traditional chatbots or conversational AI systems. We believe that, look, over a period of time, if a solution is so advanced and it's a step change, eventually the existing solutions or chatbots will have to either transform and imbibe the new technology, or they'll have to make way for the new solutions. So that's how we kind of see it. And on the cost side, as I said, long-term game, if you play the long-term game, the costs are worth it, in our opinion. Okay, I think we're almost at the top of the hour. We will be sharing, I hope you have subscribed to the complimentary offer, and we'll be sharing the webinar deck as well. So thank you for joining.
Thank you so much, everyone, for taking our time and joining us.